Guns N' Roses would rule the world from 1988 to 1993, releasing several huge albums, including Appetite for Destruction and the Use Your Illusion records. Following the Use Your Illusion tour in 1993, the band struggled to write new material. The band would cobble together a covers album that was put out in the later part of 93 titled The Spaghetti Incident, and the following year they released a cover of the Rolling Stones song Sympathy for the Devil for the film Interview with the Vampire. In 1995, Slash formed a side project named Slash's Snakepit, which released the album It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere. It signaled the end of the guitarist's working relationship with frontman Axl Rose for nearly 2 decades. He would leave the band the following year and would be followed by bassist Duff McKagan in 1997, and drummer Matt Sorum would be fired by Rose the same year. By 1998, Rose was the last man standing from the 80s lineup of the group. He now had to assemble a new band, and while a lot of people came and went over the next 2 decades, one of the more interesting members to join Guns N' Roses was guitarist Buckethead. Today, let's take a look at his time in the band. It was frequently reported in the press in the early to mid-90s that frontman Axl Rose was not just a fan of hard rock music, but more alternative bands including Jane's Addiction, Pearl Jam, and 9 Inch Nails. When Guns N' Roses began working on their proper follow-up to 1991's Use Your Illusion records, it was reported that Rose wanted the band's music to grow and evolve, while guitarist Slash wanted to stay closer to the band's hard rock sound. Perhaps Rose gave us a sneak peek of where his mind was at the time when he put out the head-scratching tune My World at the end of Use Your Illusion 2. In 1995, Slash, who was doing press for Snakepit, revealed where Axl's mind was at the time musically, saying to Metal Hammer, "There was a point where Axl goes, I'm going to do a solo record and I'm going to get Trent Reznor and Dave Navarro and Dave Grohl, the drummer from Nirvana, and so on." And it's like, he doesn't even know half these people. He's just pulling them out of the sky, he'd recall. In a separate interview with Canadian radio in the same year, Slash would state, then Axl decided his solo project he could do with Guns, which I was like, after doing all these videos and this and that and the other, I was like, no, I don't want to get involved in any kind of Stephanie Seymour ballads or any of that shit. As Axl assembled his new lineup of Guns N' Roses in the late 90s, he would bring in 9 Inch Nails guitarist Robin Fink, who played with the band in both 1998 and 1999, but he would depart the group just before the millennium, leaving the group without a guitarist. While future guitarist Richard Fortus was asked to audition, it would fall through with him recalling to Ultimate Guitar. They called and said, yeah, we want to fly you out this week. I was going to be there anyways doing sessions, so I could do it at that time. They said perfect. I didn't hear anything back from them, so I just figured, well, it might not be happening. In a separate interview with the Times Union, he would state, before that audition happened, Axl saw Buckethead play and he decided to go with him instead. Fortus wouldn't join the band until 2002 and still plays with them to this day. As for how Buckethead joined, Rose wasn't sure how to get a hold of the guitarist, but Guns N' Roses drummer at the time, Josh Freese, knew the guitarist and helped Rose track him down. Freese would reveal in a podcast interview that he had heard that Buckethead was up in San Francisco during the late 90s, hanging out with the band Primus, so Freese would place a call to Primus's then manager Dave Lefkowitz, recalling the conversation he had, saying, "The first thing I said was, do you think Buckethead would be into this? He's such a quirky, weird artist." And Dave goes, "Yeah, I think he's tired of the starving artist routine. I think he's ready to make a living." Things wouldn't be solidified until Buckethead was invited to Rose's own personal home for Christmas in 1999. It had been a tough holiday season for Bucket, who was holding out hope that somebody would get him a certain type of leather-faced doll. To his surprise, Rose found the doll, and Bucket took it as a sign that he should join Guns N' Roses. Josh Freese would end up leaving the band by 2000 after his contract expired and would be replaced by drummer Brain, who coincidentally enough was playing with Primus at the time, and he would be lured to Guns N' Roses by Buckethead. Brain would reveal how Buckethead officially joined the band, recalling to the I'd Hit That podcast, "I think Axl and Buckethead went to Disneyland and they signed in the Haunted Mansion. I think as he was on the ride, he signed the contract. I mean, you can't make this up." Robin Fink would end up rejoining the band, and the band started to play shows in the early 2000s, with Rose comparing the chemistry between the two guitarists, telling Detroit radio station WRIF in 2002, "When we did our first show in Vegas, Robin and Buckethead didn't know each other at all. You got two lead guitar players trying to kill each other with their abilities. I think they can be cordial to each other, that whole kind of thing, but when they're actually playing, it gets that kind of alpha male thing going, like who's the real lead guitar player," he'd recall. By the early 2000s, Guns N' Roses was spending a good amount of time and money in the studio, working on their forthcoming record Chinese Democracy. Producers came and went, and Interscope, the band's label, would soon bring in A&R man Tom Zutaut, who signed Guns N' Roses back in 1986, to help push the project towards the finish line. By this point in time, Guns N' Roses' album was past due and costing the label millions of dollars. Frustration got to Buckethead, who quit Guns N' Roses in 2001, as he was tired of the inactivity in the band. There were also reports that producer Roy Thomas Baker, who had worked on Chinese Democracy in the early 2000s, didn't get along with the guitarist, so there was also some tension there. Despite Buckethead quitting, Rose still wanted to convince him to change his mind. Rose would tell Zutaut to make things right, with the producer recalling to Classic Rock magazine, there was a bit of creative tension with Roy Thomas Baker. It could have well been what with Roy being an eccentric, flamboyant British rock god producer and Buckethead being, well, a chicken. Bucket's frustrated at the whole situation at coming into the studio every day when Axl's not there, playing the same parts over and over. Axl's his hero, he tells him, but he just spent a year going nowhere. He doesn't think the record will ever come out and he just has to move on with his life, he'd recall. Buckethead would agree to come back in the band after Zutaut offered to build him a chicken coop in the studio. Zutaut would add in the same interview, as the weeks went by, the chicken coop joke started to wear thin. So Bucket comes and says he needs a TV so he can sit in the chicken coop and watch porn, and that seemed to really inspire him to record some great stuff. According to Zutaut, Axl would turn up to the studio one day and see the kinds of movies Buckethead was watching in his chicken coop to help inspire his guitar parts. Rose was visibly shaken, according to Zutaut, and had a chat with Bucket that he didn't want his album being tainted by adult movies. The chat left Buckethead pretty disappointed, and by the summer of 2001, the band was slated to tour Europe. But Buckethead developed an undiagnosed stomach condition, forcing the cancellation of these dates. It was during the same time that reports came out that Buckethead once again left the band, but he was lured back by Rose, with the New York Times reporting, and I quote, Axl accompanied Buckethead on a jaunt to Disneyland. When the guitarist was drifting towards quitting, several people involved recalled. It was around this time that Axl also had a litter of wolf dogs born at his house and gave one of them to Zutaut's daughter, who had just lost her dog. Zutaut would recall to Classic Rock. Axl brings in a puppy, it goes in the chicken coop and takes a dump. No one was allowed to go in there apart from the assistant engineers to adjust mics. You could not destroy the spirit and karmic vibe of the coop, his personal retreat, but his chicken wire. You could stand outside and talk, looking through, but nobody was allowed in there with the hacked up dolls and rubber chickens and heads, he'd recall. Zutaut would soon be fired from the project, and Classic Rock wrote an article on the making of Chinese Democracy stating, a month after the September 11th attacks on America, the band members watched the news. Thousands of Islamic militants fought with the police in the Pakistani city of Karachi, setting fire to cars, buses, and an outlet of Kentucky Fried Chicken. But Buckethead was already on his feet. He wasn't going to take it anymore. That's effing it, he was yelling as the screen showed images of the Karachi KFC with flames kicking out of its windows. They've gone too far now. I'm joining the effing army. They're not going to hit KFC. No effing way. That's it. I can't record anymore. I'm joining the army. Now we are really at war. And with that, he grabbed his KFC hat, collected some things from the specially built chicken coop in the studio, and left. Some of the guys stayed on a while, but not a lot got done that day, Classic Rock would report. In 2002, Guns N' Roses continued to record Chinese Democracy with no firm release date, and made their first public appearance in America at the 2002 VMAs. I've covered that event in much more detail, the link is down below. Following the Video Music Awards, the band embarked on an ill-fated tour through North America that was eventually cancelled due to low ticket sales and riots in both Vancouver and Philadelphia. Here's an MTV News report interviewing Buckethead from that time.
Idiosyncratic guitarist been so celebrated, Kurt Loder found out just who is this masked man.
Chances are you've never seen or heard anyone quite like Buckethead. But what's with the chicken fixation? And why the KFC bucket?
He put the bucket on his head because he thought he could help all those dead chickens come back to life. So when he plays, it's like the sounds of those dead chickens are coming through his hands.
Since there's apparently nothing Buckethead can't play, from pure shred to mind-bending skronk, to sleek country-style chicken picking, his style is hard to characterize.
How would you describe the Buckethead style?
Disembodied.
But there's nothing disembodied about being on the road with a big-name band.
Does Buckethead ever, pick up chicks or anything?
He's scared of girls. He doesn't understand the feeling that he gets.
Huh. It's not a chicken kind of confusion, is it?
That's It's a possibility. I've never thought of that. I'm sure he hasn't either.
Whatever his possible personal problems, Buckethead has no trouble being awesome on guitar, and he apparently thinks the new Guns N' Roses band could evolve into something special.
I think, yeah, there's lots of exciting things down the road. And it's like when you're cooking when you got a nice loaf in the oven and it's not quite done and you're just really excited for it.
2003 would prove to be another quiet year on the recording front, and by the end of 2003, Buckethead's manager revealed that the guitarist finally quit the band due to the group's inability to deliver an album. Rose would release a statement in March of 2004 canceling their planned European tour, citing Buckethead's departure as one of the main reasons. In his statement, Rose would write, "During his tenure with the band, Buckethead has been creating uncertainty and confusion and making it virtually impossible to move forward with recording, rehearsals, and live plans with confidence," adding, "Buckethead's transient lifestyle has made it impossible for even his closest friends to have nearly any form of communication with him whatsoever." Chinese Democracy would finally be released in November of 2008, and Buckethead would be credited as playing on all the songs on the album, except for Catcher in the Rye and This I Love, in addition to coming up with arrangements for the songs Shackler's Revenge, Scraped, and Sorry. A few weeks after the album came out, Rose would talk about Buckethead during a fan chat online, where he said the following, "I have a blast with Bucket on tour and get a big kick out of this guy," adding, "I have no issues with Bucket. It was hard to tell what was real or not, things we were told by Merck," referring to the band's manager. "A lot of feelings were hurt on this side of the fence and how things went down." Slash would tell Guitar World in 2018, 2 years after he rejoined Guns N' Roses and started playing a few Chinese Democracy tunes during live shows. "That said, I want to give credit to where credit's due. The guitar players that played on Chinese Democracy, Buckethead being one of the main ones, are effing amazing guitar players. I have to give those guys a shout out because the stuff was really cool, very different from what I normally do, so it's been interesting learning some of the stuff that was on the record. I definitely had to figure out ways to adapt to it." As for Buckethead, when he's done interviews since leaving Guns N' Roses and the topic of the band comes up, he's been pretty quiet. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Story. Take care.